The Nanjing Massacre, a chronicle of atrocity and remembrance. The winter of 1937 marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in modern human history, a period of unchecked brutality that would forever scar the collective memory of the world. The Nanjing Massacre, also known as the Rape of Nanjing, occurred during the Second Sino-Japanese War when the Imperial Japanese Army captured the Chinese capital of Nanjing. Over the course of 6 harrowing weeks, starting in mid-December 1937, Japanese forces engaged in a campaign of mass murder, systemic rape, and widespread destruction against the city's surrendered soldiers and civilian population. This atrocity stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of war, militarism, and the dehumanization of an enemy. The context of the massacre was forged in the grueling Battle of Shanghai, which immediately preceded the march on Nanjing. The Chinese nationalist forces had put up an unexpectedly fierce resistance in Shanghai, inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese military and frustrating their plans for a swift conquest of China. As the Japanese forces finally broke through and advanced up the Yangtze River toward the capital, they were fueled by a combination of exhaustion, dwindling supplies, and a desire for vengeance against the Chinese resistance. By the time they reached the outskirts of Nanjing, military discipline was already fraying, and a deeply ingrained sense of racial superiority had laid the psychological groundwork for the horrors to come. On December 13, 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army officially breached the walls of Nanjing. The Chinese nationalist government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, had already fled the capital, relocating further inland, and leaving the city's defense to a poorly organized and rapidly disintegrating garrison. As the defense collapsed, tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers discarded their uniforms and attempted to blend in with the civilian population, while hundreds of thousands of civilians found themselves trapped within the city walls with nowhere to run. The entrance of the Japanese army did not bring a conventional military occupation. Instead, it triggered an immediate and total breakdown of civilized order. In the immediate aftermath of the city's capture, Japanese forces focused on neutralizing any perceived remaining threats, which quickly escalated into the mass execution of prisoners of war. In clear violation of the laws of war, Japanese troops systematically hunted down former Chinese soldiers. Tens of thousands of young men suspected of being combatants were rounded up, marched to the banks of the Yangtze River or to large execution trenches outside the city, and slaughtered. They were killed en masse by machine gun fire, used as living targets for bayonet practice, or subjected to brutal decapitation contests by Japanese officers. The violence did not stop with surrendered combatants. It rapidly and indiscriminately spilled over to the civilian population. Japanese soldiers roamed the streets, executing men, women, and children with absolute impunity. Civilians were shot for running, for failing to show proper deference, or simply for being present. Eyewitness accounts from survivors and foreign observers detail horrific scenes of gratuitous violence, including civilians being buried alive, burned to death, or torn apart by military dogs. The sheer scale of the random killings transformed the streets of the once thriving capital into a landscape of unimaginable carnage. Perhaps the most infamous aspect of the atrocity, which gave the event its terrible moniker, was the systematic and widespread sexual violence. It is estimated that tens of thousands of Chinese women and girls, ranging from young children to the elderly, were brutally assaulted by Japanese soldiers. These assaults occurred in homes, on the streets, and in makeshift military brothels. The sexual violence was frequently accompanied by extreme physical mutilation, and usually culminated in the murder of the victims to eliminate witnesses. The profound physical and psychological trauma inflicted upon the women of Nanjing remains one of the most horrifying legacies of the invasion. Alongside the immense loss of human life, Nanjing suffered devastating physical and cultural destruction. Looting became an organized military enterprise as well as a chaotic free-for-all for individual soldiers. Homes, businesses, and government buildings were stripped of their valuables, while centuries-old cultural artifacts and historical texts were stolen or destroyed. To compound the devastation, Japanese troops systematically set fire to large swaths of the city. By the time the violence finally began to subside, a significant portion of Nanjing had been reduced to ashes and rubble. Amidst this landscape of unchecked brutality, a small beacon of humanity emerged in the form of the International Committee for the Nanjing Safety Zone. Composed of a small group of Western missionaries, businessmen, and academics who had chosen to remain in the city, the committee established a demilitarized zone in the center of Nanjing. Led by figures like German businessman John Rabe and American missionary Minnie Vautrin, this unarmed coalition bravely stood between the Japanese army and the Chinese civilians. Through sheer moral force and tireless negotiation, they managed to shelter an estimated 200,000 to 250,000 Chinese refugees within the narrow confines of the safety zone. The presence of these Western observers was crucial not only for saving lives, but for documenting the atrocities for the outside world. Individuals like American Episcopal minister John McGee secretly filmed the carnage, while others kept detailed diaries and smuggled letters out of the city. Their first-hand accounts provided irrefutable contemporaneous evidence of a massacre, countering early attempts by the Japanese military to suppress information about the events. These documents would later serve as vital testimony during post-war war crimes tribunals, ensuring that the voices of the victims were not completely silenced. The true scale of the massacre has been the subject of extensive historical research. While exact figures are impossible to determine due to the chaos of the event and the destruction of records, the death toll is staggering. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East IMTFE, convened after World War II, estimated that over 200,000 people were murdered, while official Chinese historical records and monuments commemorate 300,000 victims. Regardless of the specific number, the consensus among mainstream historians worldwide is that a mass atrocity of staggering proportions occurred. The period of intense, chaotic violence lasted for approximately 6 weeks, eventually subsiding in late January or early February 1938, as the Japanese High Command finally moved to restore a semblance of order. A collaborationist government was eventually installed, and the surviving residents of Nanjing were subjected to a harsh and oppressive occupation that lasted until the end of World War II in 1945. The city, once the proud capital of the Republic of China, was left a shadow of its former self, its population traumatized, and its infrastructure decimated. Decades later, the Nanjing Massacre remains a deeply sensitive and contested issue in East Asian international relations. While many Japanese leaders and citizens have acknowledged and apologized for the wartime atrocities, there remains a vocal minority of historical revisionists in Japan who attempt to downplay the scale of the massacre or deny occurred entirely. This ongoing denialism continues to be a source of profound pain for survivors and a significant diplomatic friction point between China and Japan, illustrating how unresolved historical traumas can continue to shape contemporary geopolitics. Ultimately, the Nanjing Massacre stands as a harrowing testament to the depths of human cruelty when empathy is erased by nationalism and war. It demands continuous historical reckoning, not to perpetuate hatred, but to honor the hundreds of thousands of innocent lives lost and shattered. Remembering the horrors of Nanjing is a necessary, albeit painful, duty for the global community. It serves as a permanent warning about the fragility of civilization and the enduring necessity of upholding human rights, international law, and the fundamental dignity of all people.